and we are back with our reading Lord of the Rings series, except this time we're reading The Hobbit for the first time. So if you're new here, I'm doing a series where I go through my reading of the Lord of the Rings series for the very first time. I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, but I've never read the books. With media, I feel like if you've seen it from a young age, then you know it's something that you know, versus as if you experience something as an adult. Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, it's so much more special. So this is what I'm doing when I'm reading these books for the very first time. Before we get into the Hobbit book, I do feel like it is important to kind of go over my experience with the Hobbit. So back when the Hobbit movies were coming out, these were movies that I really loved. They were movies that I really championed. I used to be in all the YouTube comment sections back then, you know, defending this movie to the very end. I was the one that was telling people that they were wrong for hating it. They were good movies and different things like that. And my opinion on it has changed a lot throughout the years. If you like or love the Hobbit movies, this isn't an attack on you, but over the years, I've kind of just come to not really like them at all. I may watch them every now and then. I do think as movies, they're nowhere near as good as they could have been. I honestly think that The Hobbit should have been one movie, make it like 3 hours, 3.5 hours, or even do an extended edition that's 4 hours. I don't think it should have been 2 movies originally, and it definitely shouldn't have been 3 movies. So let's get into my reading of The Hobbit. Here are just some things that I found interesting and things that I didn't know. This is my copy. So first up is that it seems like when the dwarves come to visit Bilbo and his conversation with Gandalf, they're pretty much the same as they are in the film. I like that the kind of reasoning for Bilbo wanting to go is different. He doesn't really want to go until he hears the Misty Mountain song, and that's really what convinces him. There's more singing in this book, I feel like, than there is in Two Towers and Return of the King, but not as much singing as Fellowship of the Ring. I'm already on my second point, but we immediately come into the things that are very different from the movie. So Azog, who's a prominent villain in the movie, barely in this, I think, for a couple sentences, but we learn that he actually is the one to kill Thorir in the Mines of Moria. So I thought this was interesting because the mines are held in just this high regard, but they're really kind of tragic because so many people have died. Thorir has died there, Balin has died there, Oin has died there. I think he was killed by the Watcher. And then there was one other dwarf, I'm forgetting his name. The troll scene is pretty similar to how it is in the movie too. If I ever say it's similar to how it is in the movie, I've seen the movies first. I know that the books came first. I don't really think of a better way to write this, so I just wrote Elrond in all caps. The thing I'm noticing is that the personality in this movie does feel a lot different than in the other 3 Lord of the Rings books. In those books, just straight to the story. In this one, it is kind of fourth wall breaking to where the author kind of addresses you and kind of addresses that this is a story. I'm not totally sure how I feel about that. It is still an amazing book, but it is different than the other 3. We then get into some of the differences between the movie characters. So movie Thorin, I feel like, is a lot more intense than book Thorin is. He's a lot more set in his opinions, but Thorin in this book is really not that way at all. I'd say he's kind of, you know, standoffish, but he's not really anywhere near as much as an asshole as he is in the movies. And I also want to say that the dwarves are different. They're a lot more welcoming in this book, I feel like. Now, this next part, I feel like I already know the answer, but I have to ask for anyone that's into Tolkien more than I am, that knows more than I do. Is Gwaihir the Lord of the Eagles? Like he is. If you watch my other Lord of the Rings reading for the very first time, Gwaihir is my favorite Lord of the Rings book character. He's kind of the Widge Antilles of the books. The only book character I think to feature in all 3 of the books that's in the movies, even though in the movies he doesn't talk. I feel like this is kind of a Thranduil situation to where Thranduil isn't named in this book, but later on he is. So I'm going to make an educated guess and say that Gwaihir is Lord of the Eagles. Then get into how short this book is. And it's at this point, if you've seen the movies, that you kind of realize how much filler they really added to the movies. This book is 276 pages. That will probably vary with different books and different sizes of books. But the first Hobbit movie, it only goes until the first 100 pages of the book. This means that the very first movie is every 33 pages is 1 hour, and it doesn't line up. I do feel like the first Hobbit movie is maybe the most faithful to the book. It's kind of crazy to think about. The second Hobbit movie ends at page 214. So kind of the same thing as the first 100 pages, a little bit different, but it's kind of crazy to think about how much they filled in. It's not the book's fault. The book is paced really well. I think it's the best paced book I've ever read. We then get to Beorn. I think the Beorn scene is so much fun. That Gandalf tells all the dwarves he's not going to like all of you at once, so 2 of you come every 5 minutes. It's kind of similar to Tom Bombadil, where I feel like the Beorn scene, getting to spend that time in his house, is so magical. I love that there's the giant bumblebees. I think his house is so fun, and I wish we saw more of it. I'm gonna go into the opposite of Adore here. I really do not like Bomber as a character. I don't know how fans of The Hobbit feel about him, but I don't see any sort of world where people bring someone like Bomber on an expedition, a place where you're constantly in danger, constantly in peril, because I don't feel like he contributes anything to anything at all. It's a character that completely, puts everyone's lives at risk, and I generally don't know why he was ever brought along in the first place. And keeping in line with Lord of the Rings, you get a better idea of time when it comes to the books because there's so much more time to explain things. So after that, we then get to Lake Town. The whole barrel sequence and Desolation of Smaug just doesn't happen here at all. The elves actually don't even notice that they're away. Also, zero trouble with the Lake Town people. One thing that's interesting is that the dwarves actually already know about the ring at this point. So there's even times, where they're encouraging Bilbo to put it on. There's a quote in this book that is, "Dwarves are not heroes." All the dwarves that we've met in Lord of the Rings, that this is exactly the opposite. You think of Gimli, you think of Durin from Rings of Power, you think of all the dwarves in this, or most of them, besides Bomber. The dwarves are heroes. There's another really cool line in this book. I think this book has some great dialogue. "It does not do to leave a dragon out of your calculations if you live near him." I wish this was one that made it into the movies. Maybe it did. I seriously doubt it did. Just a cool line. And speaking of dragon, this is where we get to Smaug. And at least me, I feel like Thorin, he's different than he is in the movies. I feel like Bilbo is the one that's leading this more than he is. Then get to meet Smaug, and Smaug is amazing. I love the chapter with him. Insanely intelligent, but also really ruthless. It drives home that, Smaug is definitely evil. He leaves the cave once he kind of talks with Bilbo to kind of look for the dwarves, and their ponies are near away, and he eats most of them. One thing I was thinking about when I was reading this too is that Glowing, Gimli's dad, is really not in this at all. Honestly extends to all of the dwarves. I know that a criticism that I've heard, at least of the movies, is that, you don't get a lot of time with the dwarves. You get like zero time with any of them in the book. Balin is probably the one that talks the most, but Glowing, I feel like he had a lot more to do in Fellowship of the Ring, the book, versus this book, because in Fellowship he has that talk with Frodo. I think that he's looking for members of that company. Next one was a shock too. I wasn't sure if he was a Peter Jackson creation. Bard doesn't show up in this book until 228 pages in. Spending a lot of time kind of curious on where he was, or even if he was a part of the story at all. One part of this that I really liked is that the thrust that you briefly see in Desolation of Smaug, it actually talks, and because it's from Dale, it's able to talk to Bard, and it actually tells him a little bit about it tells him about Smaug's weak point. Bilbo is actually the one to notice this when he's talking to him in the cave. There's no information about it beforehand, so Bilbo is really the one to figure it out. It just goes to show how intelligent Bilbo is. One thing I thought was really crazy is that Thorin and Smaug never even speak. Smaug never even speaks to any of the dwarves. He knows that they're there. Smaug never talks with any of them, which I thought was interesting. I kind of feel like the movies made an improvement on that because, there's this big quest to get this thing back from this dragon, that's caused so much problems, but in the book they never even interact at all. Speaking of never being in this at all, Bolg is not in this at all. In this for a few sentences. I find it kind of funny that there is this resounding resentment towards Smaug, and even the goblins were happy that Smaug had died. We get into the Battle of the Five Armies. This is where we kind of get into my biggest problem, not with the book, but with the movie. Battle of the Five Armies is easily the worst Lord of the Rings movie by far. We do get the Battle of the Five Armies. It's kind of short. It's not really in this book for a long time, so this is kind of another mark against the movies where it feels like an entire movie is the battle, but the battle is barely in this book. I feel like there are so many chapters that are a lot longer than the battle. We do get more eagles. It's never explicitly stated if Gwaihir is there, but I'm going to make another educated guess and say that he is there. Deaths are a lot less dramatic too. So Thorin does die. I did like that he was buried with the Arkenstone and Orcrist. Billy and Killy die. I already knew that. Kind of anticlimactic that it just kind of happens in a paragraph that you find out. You don't actually see it happening, you just kind of get the after. I like that after everything, Bilbo gives Thranduil a necklace because he feels bad about eating his food. I thought that was just a good testament about integrity of Bilbo. I do really enjoy this time after, all the major events in The Hobbit take place. Bilbo and Gandalf start to head home, and I like that you get to spend a little bit more time with Beorn. You find that there are a lot more skin changers born out of Beorn's line, and so I hope that skin changers come into these stories again at some point. After all this, Bilbo and Gandalf go back to Rivendell again, And I really like that this mirrors Lord of the Rings, or Lord of the Rings mirrors this. They go to Rivendell before they start this big journey, and then after everything has happened, they go back to Rivendell. Bilbo does keep the ring a secret, but I like that he uses it whenever people come to his house unexpectedly. Bilbo really represents introverts to a T. I feel like he represents introverts so well. Later on, Balin and Gandalf actually come to visit Bilbo too, which I thought was really nice. Lake Town is actually rebuilt, and there's friendships between the elves and the dwarves and the men, which I really liked as well. And that brings us to a close of The Hobbit. I have to say that this book is an absolute breeze to get through. This book is paced so well. I had so much fun reading this book, and this is one I feel like I may read even more than I read some of the other Lord of the Rings books. As for my issues, I don't really have any issues. I don't like Bomber, but he's barely in the story to where it really even matters. There is singing in this book, but it's nowhere near as Fellowship of the Ring. I don't feel like it was ever excessive singing. So when it comes to a final rating, I'm still thinking on my rating. I want to kind of take some time and really, digest and think about this. And my Fellowship of the Ring rating, I reviewed it too early, and I gave it a higher score than I think I would give it now. So I want to take some time to sit and digest this and think of a rating. But as far as the rating goes, I think this is pretty much a perfect book. Can't really think of any issues with this. And here are just some of the things that are not in the book but are in the movies. The most evident one is Tauriel, who was created for the movies. I actually like Tauriel a lot. I think she's a good character. Honestly, don't get the hate. Legolas is not in this book. Azog is not in this book besides for a couple sentences. Radagast Brown is not in this book at all. That was surprising. So I'm wondering if he's in any of the other books at all. I don't even know if this is his name. I'm gonna look it up before I post this video. I wrote down Alfred, I think that's his name, but I wrote in parentheses Jar Jar Binks because that's what he reminds me a lot of. I think that's also goes into reason of why Battle of the Five Armies is just not a good movie. So what's crazy to me is that you could take all these other things and you can make an entirely separate Middle-earth movie. It is a shame that they did not go that route. But when it comes to book versus movie, I feel like the Hobbit book completely, obliterates the movies in terms of quality. I had an absolute blast again reading these books. And I do feel kind of sad that we are now at the end of the journey. I think to read these books has not only, made me appreciate the world of Middle-earth so much more, but, this is starting to become my favorite worlds, my favorite universe. And I can't wait to, go back and reread these books. But I do feel really sad that this is the end. So if you've made it to the end of the video, thank you so much for sticking through this. Even if you've watched any of my other, reading Lord of the Rings for the very first time, I really appreciate that as well. Catch you in the next one.
Farewell, my brave hobbits. My work is now finished. Here at last, on the shores of the sea, comes the end of our fellowship. I will not say do not weep, for not all tears are an evil.
What do you guys know about this? I actually don't know too much about this. I'm actually nowhere near being done with the worlds of Middle-earth. I'm actually just getting started. Now we're entering the period where there are no more movies. I do plan to read some of the other books. I'm excited to learn more about Elrond and Gil-galad. I was watching Rings of Power Season 2, and seeing him in action and just seeing him this last season has really piqued my interest. Battle of the Last Alliance is something that's so interesting to me. I'm so excited to learn more about this world and, learn about the Silmarillion. So many people, hold the Silmarillion in this high regard. So there will definitely be a lot more book content from me about Lord of the Rings and this world. Now, I'm being serious this time. I'll be back again with more Lord of the Rings book content. But other than that, thank you so much for sticking through it, and I'll catch you in the next one.